Hello everyone, my name is Lowko and welcome to some more StarCraft 2 Legacy of the Void. Today it is time for another live game and this time around I am playing a Protoss versus Zerg for you. For those of you unaware, I've been playing quite a little bit of random as of late, and with most of my Protoss games, I have been going for 2 base all-ins. Now I know what some of you will be thinking. And you will probably consider that to be a relatively cheesy way to open up. But I could not disagree more. I mean, there's definitely cheeses that you can execute with Protoss that are relatively easy. But in my experience, at the very least so far, while playing Protoss once again, there are so many options in Legacy of the Void that it's really kind of silly to consider that to be a cheesy build. I mean, I would say that probably in maybe half of your games to maybe a third of your games, you should consider going for a 2 base all-in as Protoss, and I will try and explain to you why that is going to be the case. Now obviously there's definitely a chance that I will end up losing this game, so I'm by no means an expert in the Protoss pieces, but we are going up against master level and high diamond level players right now, as I haven't leveled up this account too far yet, but we definitely are going up against the better players in StarCraft 2. Now, the majority of people are going to be in one of the lower leagues, and I would say that if you are anywhere below this level or somewhere around this level, you should really consider going for a 2 base all-in most scenarios, as it will just simply straight up win you games. But on top of that, there's a lot of different variations that you can go for. So while some may consider it to be very cheesy, I mean, you can go for a 2 base Dark Templar all-in and cross your fingers, hope your opponent doesn't have detection. That definitely is considered to be a little bit on the cheesier end of things, right? But I know a lot of you are not really interested in that whatsoever, and you would rather go for something that's a little bit more macro focused. And the nice thing about going for 2 base all-ins is that that is totally possible. In this particular match, I'm planning on going for a robotic facility play, and hopefully it's gonna allow me to at the very least showcase to you some reasonable all-ins with potentials for transition as well. Obviously, the term all-in means that you're basically shoving all of your units in one corner of the map and you're trying to win the game straight up. And while that definitely will be my intention as well, if I do it correctly, there's a chance that I will pick up straight up, or there's a chance that I will straight up pick up the victory. But in many instances, at least in my experiences thus far, there's a big chance that you just simply pick up the victory by playing the late game as well. Say you do enough damage with the 2 base all-in, you're gonna still be capable of staying in the game for a little while longer, just because you did crippling amounts of damage. And in my experience so far, in particular while ranking up, it is completely possible to achieve that. And if you are, like, I would even go as far as saying, right, if you are somewhere along the lower leagues, right, you are somewhere, say, below, I don't know, like below Diamond League or so, I am pretty convinced that you can win every single match of Zerg versus Protoss just by playing 2 base all-in. So while I wouldn't recommend doing the same strategy every single game, it definitely has a potential in improving you as a player all in all. Now, I want to make sure that I can go for these stalkers, obviously. I'm going to go ahead and morph a couple of my units over. But I ideally want to try and see if I can get this Overlord as well. So we'll try and, there we go, we'll try and micro our way around there. Going for a second stalker here as well, so I can try and, prevent my opponent from scouting any of the incoming aggression that is undoubtedly going his way. So notice, right? I'm not going for any kind of scouting, and there is a reason for that. I'm not going for any scouting, as whatever I scout is not really going to change how I'm approaching this game. I mean, I don't think I'm currently good enough to really properly adjust my build order on the fly, like I am, for example, with Zerg, where I can scout information and quickly adjust. So if I'm not gonna be adjusting my build order anyway, depending on what I scout, why would I even go ahead and scout at all, right? Like, it's just not going to be a very helpful proposition at that point. So what I am trying to do is prevent my opponent from scouting me. I'm gonna try and set up a wall off here, as I have learned from previous games that circling run-bys, even when you're moving out already across the map, can still be a pain in the ass. So I'm trying to make sure that I set up wall-offs for my opponent, but I'm trying to prevent my opponent from really getting any kind of unnecessary scouting information, right? And what I consider to be unnecessary scouting information is like a bunch of overlords just flying in at random. Now, I want to go for triple Immortal here with 8 gateways. So I currently have 4 gateways already done. I'm going to be putting down a couple more. So that's 1, that's 2, and that's 3 and 4. And I know that I, killed a bunch of my opponent's scouting here already. Now, the nice thing is that with this all-in, you can go for a lot of different variations as well. So while I'm definitely supposed to do a heck of a lot of damage here in order to justify this, in literally, I'm pretty sure in every single game, that has been the case as well. I mean, I'm gonna have to make sure that I micro at least reasonably well here. Photon overcharge though, a little bit too powerful, and while my opponent is gonna end up killing a couple of my workers, I don't think that was really worth it right there in the end for him either. Although he did he did hit me a couple times, I guess, but I already got my gateways down. I already got my income, you know, settled up as well. By the way, the reason why my probes are carrying cake right now is because it's the birthday of StarCraft, or at least like the birth week, I guess, of StarCraft. But anyhow, he hasn't scouted what is really coming his way, right? He has not seen my Immortal play. He hasn't really seen a whole lot. And I think at this point in time, because I've been denying his economy or his scouting purposes quite well, I may very well be able to start pushing across the map shortly and do a heck of a lot of work. I got my 8 gateways done. I'm gonna go for a big warp in right here. We'll be focusing on a bunch of Adept as well as a bunch of Sentry, just because Sentries obviously can indeed be helpful. Now, my opponent is gonna end up scouting here for a little bit. I will have to go ahead and use another Photon Overcharge just to try and kill another one of those things, but it is already a little too late. He's scouting a little too late, and hopefully at the very least my opponent is learning from this situation, because he's definitely a little too late to justify scouting at this point in the game. I'm gonna go ahead and use my my Warp Prism, set it up over there, and I'm gonna go ahead and hotkey the rest of my army just like this. Now keep in mind, I still have my Mothership Core with me as well. I could return that if I wanted to, just to make sure that I could get some, you know, some reasonable home defenses up as well. But I already got a huge army here, ready to get started. Now, I may have to go ahead and make sure that my opponent isn't gonna get the greatest Baneling hits of all time. But as you can see, there's already quite a couple of kills that I'm managing to ramp up right now. And even though, you know, I didn't scout, and even though I really didn't achieve a whole lot of information from my opponent, in so many scenarios, you just straight up end up winning the game just from playing a macro-focused style in the early game and adjusting on the fly. And I'm pretty sure that if you execute this properly, there is no way that you're not going to be able to, at the very least, do significant amounts of damage. Even if it is not going to kill your opponent, you can still transition out of it and do quite a little bit of damage that way as well. Now, I'll be heading into the main with a bunch of my army. Got a bunch of my Adepts over there. Obviously, you will be able to notice here that there's going to be, you know, more damage that I will need to do in order to pick up the victory here right from the get-go. But it is pretty clear right now that I am in a very powerful position. Gonna move my Overseer or my Warp Prism over right now. We'll be moving in with more and more Adepts. And at this point in the game, my opponent is desperately trying to hold on, but we got a little bit too much stuff for him to hold on here. So keep in mind, right, some of my army is going to be over there. I'll be moving it over instead, but it's already going to be GG. Now, just to jump into the replay really quickly and explain to the Zerg players that are watching this video on what the Zerg should have done in order to prevent this. Because obviously we can be looking at this from the Protoss point of view, but let's discuss the Zerg's point of view and what he could have done to prevent taking all this damage and eventually losing the game. And it all comes down to scouting. It all comes down to maximizing your drone you know, income. You need to make sure that you get a relatively big economy up before you're going to be able to properly scout and scan what your opponent is doing. Zerg is, in this instance, in the Zerg versus Protoss matchup, in many scenarios, the reactionary race. You need to make sure you scout out what your opponent is doing, at which point you can counter it, right? Now, there's one big tip that I always try and give people, and that is scout at 3 minutes and 30 seconds. And the reason why we're scouting at 3 minutes and 30 seconds is because we can first off find out what kind of tech is going on. So notice right now, robotics facility is in the main base, already halfway done at 3 minutes and 30 seconds. He could easily fly in an Overlord right here. At the very least, get a glimpse of this robotic facility, you know, early on into the game. Secondly, you can always try and figure out the gas timings in the natural as well. So the gas timings in the natural are a rather big indication. If I wanted to go for something more tech heavy, say, for example, Void Rays, as well as like a robotic facility or whatever, I would need those gases. So that's a really big indication. Secondly, one of the things that I always recommend players do, because keep in mind, right, I executed it reasonably well 2 bays all in. I definitely did not do a perfect one. If you would go up against a high-level Protoss player and they would do the same all in, they would probably be able to hit, say, 20 to 30 seconds earlier, which is going to be right at the point where he didn't have any army whatsoever. So here's another little point in the game that is super important to realize as a Zerg player, and that should hopefully prevent you from losing any further games, and that is the third base timing. So just to give you a number, Protoss players in general will not be going for a third base any later than 5 minutes into the game. So what that means for Zerg is that even if you didn't scout at all, right, even if you saw no information whatsoever, if you just simply start making your army at 5 minutes and you just start on making more and more units, you will have enough army by the time that the Protoss hits with their 2 base all-in in almost all scenarios, given the fact that you're actually droned up properly beforehand. And I think if my opponent would just start making non-stop units right now, he's gonna be a-okay. Now in this particular case, he is indeed doing that. He's indeed trying to add on as many units here as possible, but you gotta keep in mind, he makes a little bit too many overlords. He gave away a whole bunch of units in the earlier stages of the game, did not maximize his drone count, and all in all, he's stacking up, he's getting a little bit too many things, and you know, just the pure on Zergling Baneling army, generally speaking, is not going to be enough if you're also tacking up on the side, right? And you gotta keep in mind, he also is floating quite a couple of minerals and gas that just don't allow him to do a whole lot. And yeah, he was going for the Baneling drops and all that, but or I guess they were kind of Zergling drops with a couple of Bane, or you know, kind of Zergling drops with a couple of Banelings in there. It's just a little bit messy, right? So if you manage to, I would recommend make Zerglings and you know, roaches at that point in the game at 5 minutes. You can definitely play Roach Bane or Ling Bane as well, don't get me wrong, but if you manage to pull that off at 5 minutes, you're gonna be a-okay, which is simply microing as long as you don't take all of these sentry force fields to the face. And I've had many games where, you know, the Protoss or the Zerg player will just have, you know, properly read me, at which point they will be able to counter me effectively. And honestly, that's the main difference between like Diamond and Master level Protoss or Zerg players. Anyhow, I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that like button. And if you want to see more, hit that subscribe button. Other than that, I want to thank you all very much so for watching. Have an amazing day. Do not forget to smile, alright? And I will see you in the next one. Bye!